The Terran Federation's exploratory vessel, the TCS Horizon, a marvel of long-range FTL and deep space sensor technology, was making its final approach to Sector Gamma 7, a vast, uncharted region of space bordering the territory of the enigmatic Cathar hegemony. Its mission, to conduct a preliminary survey for potential expansion, resources, and, as always, signs of intelligent life. Captain Ava Rostova, a seasoned explorer with a reputation for both unwavering courage and an insatiable curiosity, leaned forward in her command chair, watching the stars resolve into a familiar, comforting pattern. This sector had long been marked on ancient galactic charts as an exclusion zone by the elder races. A place of no interest, simply the silent expanse. That description, however, proved to be a profound understatement. As the Horizon transitioned out of FTL, its long-range sensors, calibrated for detecting even the faintest whispers of cosmic activity, registered nothing. Not just an absence of life, but an absence of everything. No starship emissions, no planetary energy signatures, no active FTL wakes. The stars themselves seemed strangely muted, their light barely piercing the oppressive void. It was as if a vast, invisible shroud had been cast over an entire quadrant of the galaxy. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, the Horizon's chief science officer, a man whose analytical mind thrived on anomalies, was visibly perplexed. His console glowed with baffling readings. Captain, the stellar flux from the designated primary star Valaris Prime is 0. Not just low, but an absolute, unmoving null reading. It's as if the star has stopped burning, yet its gravitational signature is entirely stable. He projected a holographic image of the star system. Instead of the blazing inferno of a main sequence star, Valaris Prime appeared as a perfectly smooth, inky black sphere, absorbing all light, reflecting none, yet radiating no heat or energy. It was a conceptual impossibility. Before Rostova could process this, a further anomaly materialized. Spread across the star system were faint, impossibly uniform energy fields. Not force fields, but stasis fields. These weren't localized to individual objects. They encompassed entire planets, asteroid belts, even vast swathes of empty space. They were perfectly inert, perfectly stable, perfectly silent. Petrova traced one such field with a trembling finger on her console. Captain, these fields, they are not containing anything. They are the containment. They are not protecting. They are simply preserving, freezing existence. The implication sent a chill down Rostova's spine. An entire star system, perfectly preserved in a state of absolute, unchanging stillness. It was a tomb, vast and silent, an unspeakable act of collective resignation by a civilization unknown. The discovery in Sector Gamma 7 immediately became the Terran Federation's top priority. The Horizon began a painstaking survey of the frozen system, careful not to disturb the profound stillness. They tentatively named the unknown civilization the Vlar, after their central inert sun. What they found inside the stasis fields defied all human understanding. Entire Vlar cities, perfectly preserved, glimmered under the unchanging light of the frozen stars. Their architecture was elegant, flowing, hinting at a species deeply attuned to art and science. Ships of war, frozen mid-maneuver, hung motionless in orbit. But there were no signs of battle, no distress calls, no final messages. Just an absolute, profound cessation of existence. Dr. Tanaka led the analysis of the stasis fields. They were impossibly strong, designed with a level of technological sophistication that far surpassed anything the Federation possessed. They were not merely temporal displacement fields. They were ontological inhibitors, perfectly halting all physical and conceptual processes within their embrace. Nothing decayed, nothing changed, nothing even thought within their silent domain. "It's not just a prison, Captain," Tanaka reported, his voice hushed. "It's a perfect cessation. Not death, but absolute non-being. They chose to stop existing, entirely." Rostova ordered the Horizon to reach out to the elder races. The Cathar hegemony's response was immediate and unusually terse. Ambassador Xylor, typically aloof, now spoke with a rare tremor in his guttural voice. "The Velar. They chose the great silence. They chose the ultimate peace. It is not for the young to question such wisdom. The Lumina, who communicated through complex light patterns, responded with a single, profound wave of melancholic light that conveyed immense sorrow and an understanding of unimaginable horror. They knew what the Vlar had done and why, but they would not, or could not, articulate it. The universal avoidance, the palpable dread from species that had witnessed countless galactic conflicts, fueled Rostova's intuition. This wasn't a natural phenomenon or a simple act of self-extinction. This was an escape. An entire civilization, advanced beyond human comprehension, had chosen a complete, absolute cessation of their existence to avoid something far, far worse. The frozen ships of war weren't prepared for battle. They were simply frozen. They had given up. And the sheer scale of that surrender, an entire empire choosing to simply stop, hinted at an unseen, unknowable terror so profound that it shattered the will to fight. Rostova felt a chilling realization. The Vlar had created the ultimate shroud. Not to protect their treasures, but to protect themselves from an unimaginable dread that still lingered, unseen beyond the silent fields. The Terran Federation, driven by its insatiable curiosity and its stubborn refusal to accept the unknowable, initiated Project Resurrection. Despite the warnings from the elder races, despite the profound, chilling implications of the Vlar's choice, humanity saw only a mystery to be solved, a technological marvel to be understood, and perhaps a lost civilization to be rescued. Dr. Tanaka became its lead, tasked with the impossible, to find a way to safely breach the Vlar's ontological stasis fields and revive at least a portion of their frozen world. His team, composed of the Federation's brightest minds, began with meticulous analysis. They studied the stasis field's unique energy signature, its perfect stability, its absolute resistance to all forms of external interference. They theorized that the Vlar fields were not merely projecting a static effect, but were actively absorbing and neutralizing all conceptual and physical input from outside. It was a perfect self-sustaining bubble of nothingness. Any attempt to unfreeze a small section risked destabilizing the entire field, potentially shattering the perfectly preserved Vlar into dust, or worse, unleashing whatever they had so desperately sealed away. As the team delved deeper, they began to experience subtle psychological effects. Researchers reported vivid, unsettling dreams of an absolute, crushing silence. Engineers working on the stasis field emitters complained of an inexplicable dread, a feeling of being intensely watched even in empty rooms. These were not hallucinations, but a subtle, pervasive psychological resonance that seemed to emanate from the Vlar system itself, from the act of their resignation. It was as if the lingering echo of their terror was embedded in the very stillness they had created. One linguistic expert, attempting to decipher ancient Vlar script on the hull of a frozen civilian transport, described a feeling of being pulled into a profound, suffocating void. He found a fragmented log only partially coherent through the dampening effect of the stasis field. The text spoke not of an enemy, but of an unraveling silence, a great eye that sees all, and by seeing, unmakes. The log ended abruptly with a single, chilling phrase, "Better the stillness than the sight." Rostova read the translation, a cold knot forming in her stomach. An unraveling silence, an eye that unmakes. This wasn't a physical threat. It was a conceptual horror, an entity that destroyed by mere observation, by simply perceiving a thing out of existence. The Vlar hadn't gone into stasis to escape a physical force. They had chosen absolute non-existence to escape cosmic perception, and humanity, with its incessant curiosity, its stubborn insistence on looking and understanding, was about to inadvertently awaken whatever it was that drove an entire civilization to collective, silent resignation. They were about to become the focus of the unraveling silence. Despite the mounting psychological pressure and the unsettling hints of the unraveling silence, Terran curiosity proved irrepressible. Project Resurrection pushed forward, driven by the belief that any threat, no matter how conceptual, could be understood, quantified, and ultimately overcome by human ingenuity. Dr. Tanaka, while increasingly wary, remained scientifically resolute. He believed that the Valar's ultimate enemy, whatever it was, could not withstand the focused, analytical gaze of humanity. After months of painstaking work, Tanaka's team achieved a breakthrough. They developed a prototype micro-resonator, a device capable of briefly, momentarily, and with extreme precision, deactivating a tiny subatomic portion of a Valar stasis field. It was an incredibly delicate operation, like trying to pluck a single strand from a perfectly woven tapestry without disturbing the rest. Their target, a small, inert Valar data archive embedded in the hull of a frozen research vessel. The hope was to retrieve crucial information about the Valar, their history, and most importantly, the nature of the unraveling silence. Rostova oversaw the operation from the Horizon's command center. The tension was palpable. As the micro-resonator activated, a pinprick of normal reality momentarily reappeared within the Valar field. For a fraction of a second, the light from the Horizon's internal sensors touched the Valar archive. And in that instant, something profound, terrifying, and utterly alien occurred. The data archive didn't just activate, it violently unraveled. Not in a physical explosion, but in a conceptual implosion. Its very form distorted, its informational structure dissolving into a meaningless blur. What was once a solid object became a flicker, then a void. The visual sensors that recorded it briefly malfunctioned, their data streams corrupted by impossible self-contradictory information. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible psychic echo reverberated through the Horizon's deep space sensor array. A wave of profound, utter emptiness, a sense of having been utterly unseen and unmade. Tanaka stumbled back from his console, his face pale, his hands trembling. "It saw us, Captain," he whispered, his voice hoarse with dawning horror. Even through the micro-resonator, it saw that small piece of Valar. And by seeing it, by perceiving it, it unmade it. Just like the log said. Just like the Valar feared. Rostova stared at the now empty space where the archive had been, her own mind struggling to process the impossible. Humanity's insatiable curiosity, its relentless drive to look, to perceive, to understand, had just touched the edge of an unthinkable cosmic horror. They had not just woken the unraveling silence. They had just given it something new to see. And by doing so, they had brought its terrible, unmaking gaze upon themselves. The incident with the Valar data archive sent a chilling wave through Project Resurrection. The casual destruction of a physical object through mere perception, the psychic echo of utter emptiness. It was an experience that fundamentally defied human understanding. Dr. Tanaka became obsessed with the concept of the unraveling silence and the great eye, as the Valar fragment described it. He theorized that this entity, which he tentatively named the Perceiver of Oblivion, was not a being in the conventional sense, but a fundamental force or entity whose very act of observation caused a cessation of existence. It didn't destroy through force, but through unmaking. Commander Rostova ordered a strict perceptual embargo around the Valar system. No active scans, no visual observation, no direct interaction that could potentially draw the perceiver's attention. The Horizon retreated to a safe distance, maintaining only passive, non-perceptual sensor sweeps for any subtle changes in the larger stasis field. The tension on board was palpable. Every flicker of a console, every shadow, seemed to hold the potential for an unseen, unmaking gaze. The psychological toll on the crew began to manifest. Some researchers who had worked closely with the micro-resonator reported unsettling sensory phenomena. Moments where objects in their peripheral vision seemed to subtly flicker out of existence, only to reappear. Others described a pervasive feeling of being unseen themselves, a terrifying sense of losing their own objective reality. These were not hallucinations born of fear, but subtle, insidious effects of the perceiver's presence, a lingering resonance from its brief sight of the Valar archive. It was as if their minds, by actively trying to comprehend such an entity, were inadvertently making themselves vulnerable to its subtle power. Tanaka, using the Horizon's most sensitive, non-perceptual sensors, detected faint entropic ripples emanating from the velar system. These weren't energy waves, but subtle distortions in the fabric of causality itself. Tiny, localized moments where cause and effect briefly became untethered. It was the residual effect of the perceiver's unmaking gaze. "Captain," Tanaka reported, his voice low and strained, "it's like a ripple in a pond." When it perceived that archive, it created a conceptual vacuum, and reality is subtly rushing in to fill it. But it's leaving behind traces of non-existence, gaps in logic. Rostova knew they couldn't simply ignore it. The perceiver of Oblivion was an active threat, and humanity's very existence, their drive to explore, to observe, to understand, made them its natural target. The elder race's silent resignation now made chilling, perfect sense. They had chosen to become conceptually inert, to become uninteresting to the perceiver, effectively blinding it to their existence. But humanity could not simply choose to stop perceiving, to stop existing. Their very nature was an act of constant observation and creation of meaning. They had to find a way to make themselves unperceivable without ceasing to be. With the perceiver of Oblivion an undeniable, if unseen, threat, project, Resurrection was retasked. Its new objective, to devise a method of conceptual cloaking, a way for human vessels or even entire colonies to become uninteresting to the perceiver, to pass through its conceptual gaze without being perceived into non-existence. Dr. Tanaka, now visibly gaunt from lack of sleep, led the charge. He theorized that the perceiver didn't see in the visual sense, but in an ontological one. It perceived the inherent meaning or existence of an object and by doing so, could unravel it. His team began by studying the Velar's stasis fields from a non-perceptual distance. They realized the fields weren't just freezing objects. They were actively stripping them of all inherent meaning, reducing them to a state of absolute, unobservable non-being. The Velar had chosen not just to be unseen, but to be unmeaningful. This was the key. Humanity needed to learn to emulate this unmeaning without actually becoming nothing. The initial experiments were deeply disturbing. They involved generating localized conceptual dampening fields around inanimate objects. A starship model subjected to such a field didn't disappear, but its purpose, its form, its very identity as a starship would temporarily vanish. Observers would perceive a blur, a gap in their understanding, an object whose existence was so devoid of meaning that it was almost impossible to consciously acknowledge. When the field was deactivated, the object would snap back into full conceptual existence, often causing disorientation in nearby observers. The psychological toll on the researchers tasked with generating these fields was immense. They experienced profound feelings of existential dread, of their own purpose eroding, of their memories dissolving into a gray haze. One researcher temporarily forgot his own name, another the function of his own limbs. The creation of unmeaning was contagious, insidious. Yet they persevered, driven by the knowledge that this was humanity's only path to survival against a foe that destroyed by recognition. Rostova, observing the chilling effects, saw the wisdom of the elder races anew. Their retreat into minimalism, their vague histories, their lack of strong emotional ties, these weren't signs of decay, but of a centuries-long, deliberate ontological defense mechanism. They had learned, over millennia, to become conceptually bland, to exist on the fringes of meaning, thereby making themselves uninteresting to the perceiver's gaze. Humanity, with its vibrant, noisy, meaningful existence, was a blaring beacon in the cosmic void, irresistibly drawing the perceiver's attention. They had to learn the difficult art of existential camouflage. The conceptual cloaking technology, dubbed the blind spot protocol, moved from inanimate objects to living beings. The idea was to create a transient, localized field of unmeaning around a person or a small vessel, allowing them to pass through a perceived zone of the perceiver's influence without being seen into non-existence. This was not invisibility. It was unperceivability. The subject would still be physically present, but its conceptual integrity would be so diminished that the perceiver, and indeed other intelligent beings, would struggle to register its existence. The human test subjects, volunteers from Project Resurrection who had already undergone extensive psychological conditioning, found the experience profoundly unsettling. They described it as a temporary loss of self, a feeling of being a blank page, their memories momentarily hazy, their emotions dulled to a flat line. One subject, while under the influence of a blind spot field, passed directly through a room full of active crew members who looked straight through him, their minds unable to register his presence as anything more than an indistinct blur. It was a harrowing yet successful proof of concept. Dr. Tanaka, refining the blind spot protocol, theorized that the perceiver's power was not infinite. It could only unmake what it actively focused on, what it could fully perceive. A constantly shifting, fundamentally meaningless target would be too diffuse, too energetically costly for the perceiver to fully engage with. This was humanity's advantage, their capacity for chaos, for rapid conceptual shifts, for embracing the illogical. They would use their own noisy, vibrant, unpredictable nature as a shield, not by becoming meaningless, but by becoming too complexly meaningless to process. Rostova, facing increasing pressure from Federation High Command, who still struggled to grasp the nature of the unseen threat, authorized the first manned expedition using the blind spot protocol. Their target? A small, isolated Velar civilian transport vessel caught near the edge of the large system stasis field. The hope was to extract intact Velar data, or perhaps even a surviving Velar citizen shielded by the protocol. The mission was incredibly risky, not just physically, but existentially. As the small scout vessel, shrouded in its flickering conceptual dampening field, approached the Velar system, the psychological pressure on its two-person crew was immense. They felt the pervasive sense of being watched, the subtle flicker of reality, the existential dread of something that sought to unmake them. But they pushed forward, relying on the protocol, on their training, and on their uniquely human stubbornness to exist, even when the cosmos itself conspired to erase them. They were about to make contact, not with an alien, but with Oblivion's gaze. The scout vessel, the Moth, successfully reached the Velar civilian transport, shrouded in the flickering conceptual haze of the blind spot protocol. Inside, Lieutenant Commander Elise Thorne, Commander Eris Thorne's daughter, a brilliant xenobotanist, a detail Rostova had kept hidden to shield her from the deeper horror, and her partner, Sergeant Jax, a combat medic, navigated the eerie, silent interior. The transport was perfectly preserved, its Velar occupants frozen mid-stride, mid-conversation, their faces locked in expressions of serene, almost peaceful resignation. Elise's task was to interface with the Velar's internal data systems, protected by a localized, portable blind spot generator. Jax stood guard, his combat training strained by the profound stillness and the sense of an unseen presence. As Elise connected to a Velar datapad, the blind spot protocol strained. The act of reading, of actively extracting meaning from Velar data, was a conceptual anchor that momentarily weakened their unmeaningful shroud. In that instant, a terrifying phenomenon occurred. The Velar on the transport, though still physically frozen, seemed to subtly shift. Their expressions deepened, a flicker of profound despair passing across their faces, as if the brief act of human perception had caused a ripple through their absolute non-being. And then, the perceiver of Oblivion struck. Not with a roar, but with a silent conceptual precision. Jax's comms went dead. The blind spot protocol around him flickered, unable to maintain its integrity against the focused gaze. Elise looked up, her eyes wide with horror. Jax was still there, physically, but his uniform was subtly wrong, a button missing, a badge reversed. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused. He wasn't dead. He was unmade. His identity, his memories, his very purpose had been conceptually erased. He was a perfect physical specimen, but a hollow shell, a human being utterly devoid of meaning. The data pad in Elise's hand, too, had been touched by the perceiver. Its data dissolved, replaced by a single, terrifying, untranslatable symbol that seemed to convey absolute negation. Elise, shielded by her own conceptual dampener, screamed, a sound that was muffled by the protocol but echoed in her own mind. She had seen it. She had witnessed the perceiver's power. It didn't kill, it unmade. It erased the essence, leaving only the husk. She managed to reactivate Jax's blind spot, but the damage was done. They had gained a terrifying understanding of the perceiver, but at a profound, horrific price. Humanity's relentless curiosity had forced the unraveling silence to look again. And this time it had looked directly at them, proving that the price of perception, in a cosmos haunted by Oblivion, was the erasure of self. Elise Thorne returned to the Horizon, a haunted survivor, carrying not data, but the chilling, unmaking truth. The return of the Moth to the Horizon was a chilling testament to the perceiver's power. Lieutenant Commander Elise Thorne, though physically unharmed, was profoundly traumatized. Her account of Jax's conceptual erasure, the sight of a sentient being reduced to an empty shell through mere perception, sent a wave of icy dread through Project Resurrection. Dr. Tanaka examined Jax, confirming Elise's horrifying description. The medic's neural pathways were intact, his biological functions perfect, yet his mind was a tabula rasa, devoid of personality, memory, or purpose. He was the living embodiment of unmade. The price of perception was now horrifyingly clear. Humanity's insatiable drive to know, to see, to understand, was their greatest vulnerability against the perceiver of Oblivion. The Valar's silent resignation was no longer a mystery. It was a desperate, logical response to an entity that destroyed by mere recognition. They had chosen to become nothing, to disappear from its sight rather than face the unmaking gaze. Commander Rostova, her face grim, convened a full strategy meeting. Federation High Command, now fully briefed on the perceiver's nature, was in a panic. Conventional warfare was useless. How do you fight something that doesn't exist in a physical form and destroys by mere observation? Evacuation of nearby Terran colonies was considered, but the sheer scale of the Valar's silent sacrifice suggested the perceiver's reach might be galactic. There was nowhere truly safe if it truly sought out all active meaning. Dr. Tanaka, though shaken by Jax's fate, had gained a crucial insight from Elise's harrowing experience. "Captain," he explained, his voice low and intense, "the perceiver needs focus. It needs to perceive an object with enough conceptual clarity to unmake it." Jax was only partially protected by the blind spot protocol when Elise perceived the Valar data. That moment of shared focus, the shared act of meaning-making by two human minds on alien data, was enough for the perceiver to target the weakest link. It targeted purpose. He theorized that the perceiver didn't just unravel objects, it unraveled their reason for being. This chilling revelation sparked a desperate counter-strategy, Operation Labyrinth. If the perceiver targeted meaning, humanity would build a defense of complex, shifting, contradictory meaning. They wouldn't make themselves meaningless like the Valar. They would become too meaningful, too conceptually dense, too chaotically unpredictable for the perceiver to efficiently unravel. They would become a conceptual labyrinth. The stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about survival, but about defending the very essence of human existence against a cosmic horror that sought to reduce all to the void. Operation Labyrinth was an undertaking unlike any other in human history. It demanded not just technological innovation, but a profound collective act of psychological and philosophical engineering. Its goal was to create a vast, active conceptual field around Terran space, a shifting, contradictory, and overwhelmingly dense tapestry of human thought, belief, and purpose that would make individual targets impossible for the perceiver to coherently see and unravel. Under Dr. Tanaka's direction, humanity began to build conceptual spires, immense, orbital stations designed not to transmit physical data, but to amplify and broadcast torrents of human meaning. These spires didn't just broadcast information, they broadcast ideas. They projected a constant cacophonous symphony of human narratives, scientific theories and spiritual beliefs, historical records and wild speculation, deeply held convictions and playful paradoxes, personal memories and grand collective myths. It was a deliberately chaotic, constantly evolving conceptual blizzard, a digital and psychic fog of war. Elise Thorne. Her mind, now uniquely attuned to the subtle shifts in conceptual integrity, became a crucial asset. She helped refine the spire's output, ensuring it was dense enough to obscure, but not so contradictory that it led to internal mental collapse for the humans within. She guided the process of creating conceptual blind spots within the labyrinth, zones where multiple, conflicting narratives would overlap and cancel each other out. Not to become meaningless, but to become meaningfully ambiguous. These were the conceptual walls and false paths of the labyrinth. The psychological effects on humanity were profound, but manageable. Living within the labyrinth was like residing in a constant, low-grade philosophical debate. People found themselves entertaining contradictory ideas with greater ease. Debates became richer, more nuanced, less prone to simple answers. Creativity surged as minds accustomed to conceptual chaos found new ways to connect disparate ideas. It was a subtle but fundamental shift in the collective human psyche, a forced evolution towards a greater cognitive complexity. The elder races, observing humanity's new strategy, reacted with a mixture of bewilderment and profound discomfort. The Cathar, with their rigid adherence to logical simplicity, found the human labyrinth utterly baffling, a messy, inefficient cacophony. Ambassador Zyler described it as a chaotic storm of unreason. The Lumina, however, pulsed with a complex light pattern that conveyed both deep unease at the conceptual volatility and a flicker of something akin to awe. They understood the strategy. Humanity was not just hiding. It was overwhelming the observer with too much to see. They were making themselves perceptually indigestible, turning their greatest vulnerability, their vibrant, noisy meaning, into their ultimate defense. The perceiver of Oblivion reacted to Operation Labyrinth, not with an attack of force, but with an escalation of its fundamental power. As humanity's conceptual spires broadcast their chaotic tapestry of meaning, the perceiver responded with a massive, focused wave of conceptual clarity. It wasn't trying to unmake individual objects. It was trying to perceive the entire labyrinth as a single, coherent entity, to understand its underlying meaning so that it could unravel it all at once. It was a direct intellectual counter-assault, an attempt to find the single, unifying truth behind humanity's glorious chaos. The conceptual spires flickered, their energy output straining under the perceiver's focused, unblinking gaze. Within Terran space, individuals experienced moments of profound, unsettling clarity. Their deepest, most cherished beliefs suddenly seemed transparently illogical. Their complex narratives appeared as simple, reducible equations. The vibrant, chaotic meaning they had painstakingly built was suddenly being stripped away, revealing a cold, stark simplicity underneath. It was the perceiver attempting to cut through the labyrinth, to find its center and unravel it. Dr. Tanaka, watching the spire's conceptual integrity readings plummet, realized the perceiver had found a way to adapt. "Captain, it's not trying to fight the chaos," he shouted, his voice strained. "It's trying to understand it, to reduce it to a simple, perceivable truth. If it sees the pattern, it will unmake the labyrinth and everything in it." Humanity's strategy of overwhelming meaning was now being met by an entity that could overwhelm them with stark, unyielding clarity. Elise Thorne, however, had an insight born from her traumatic experience and her unique cognitive flexibility. "It's looking for the core, Dr. Tanaka," she cried out. "It's looking for the single, undeniable human purpose that holds all this together. But there isn't one. That's the point of the labyrinth. It's all of it and none of it at the same time." She theorized that the perceiver, accustomed to perceiving discrete, stable meanings, was struggling with humanity's ability to hold multiple, often contradictory, purposes simultaneously. This was humanity's final, desperate gamble. They would amplify not a single truth, but the very absence of a single unifying truth in their collective consciousness. They would lean into their own glorious, maddening inconsistency. They would become the ultimate paradox, a species defined by its constant redefinition, a labyrinth without a center, a story without a single reducible moral. The perceiver's unblinking gaze, designed to unravel coherent meaning, was about to be met by a force that was inherently, defiantly unravelable. The perceiver of Oblivion did not retreat this time. It did not adapt. Instead, it did nothing. Its focused wave of conceptual clarity, designed to cut through the labyrinth, encountered a defense that was both everywhere and nowhere, coherent yet contradictory, meaningful yet ultimately uncategorizable. Humanity's collective, chaotic assertion of self, their millions of conflicting desires, their infinite narratives, their stubborn insistence on personal meaning that defied all grand universal truths, became an insurmountable, conceptual barrier. The perceiver, designed to perceive and unmake, found nothing singular to focus on. It found only an infinite, shifting kaleidoscope of human purpose that defied reduction. The strain on the conceptual spires and on the minds of humanity gradually eased. The oppressive sense of being targeted, of being perceived into oblivion, receded. The perceiver of Oblivion remained at the fringes of Terran space, its vast, unseen presence now inert, confused. It was like a colossal cosmic predator that had attempted to swallow a cloud of glitter, too diffuse, too chaotic, too utterly unnutritious for its specialized digestive system. Humanity had not defeated it with force. They had simply made themselves perceptually indigestible. Dr. Tanaka, though forever marked by the encounter, found a profound, unsettling peace. "It has disengaged, Captain," he reported, his voice tinged with awe. "It cannot unmake what it cannot truly perceive. And it cannot perceive us, not in our totality. We are too many stories, too many truths, too many beautiful, illogical lies." Commander Rostova looked out at the distant Vilar system, still shrouded in its silent resignation, a testament to a different choice. Humanity had chosen a different path. They had embraced the chaos of their own minds, weaponized their contradictions, and asserted their right to be an unending story in a cosmos that sought to reduce all to silence. The price had been high, the haunting knowledge of the perceiver's power, the permanent shift in their collective psyche, the loss of those like Jax. But the victory was profound. The elder races, observing this unique human solution, began to cautiously approach the Terran Federation with a newfound respect and a profound, often uncomfortable curiosity. They saw humanity not as foolhardy, but as profoundly unique, a species that had forged a defense out of its own existential chaos. Some Lumina philosophers began to study human art, marveling at its capacity to hold infinite, often contradictory meanings. Some Cathar sought out human storytellers, trying to understand the power of a narrative that refused to be singular. Humanity had faced Oblivion's gaze, a cosmic horror that destroyed by seeing. And they had responded not by hiding, nor by becoming meaningless, but by becoming too vibrantly, chaotically, and gloriously meaningful to be unmade. They had chosen the unending story over the silent resignation, carving out a space for themselves in the cosmos by becoming the ultimate unperceivable labyrinth of the human soul. They would forever carry the weight of what they had seen, but they would do so as a species that had looked into the void and in its own glorious, messy way refused to be unmade.